The black leather of Chairman Han's boot crunched over a discarded, wilted carnation as he stood amidst the wreckage of a fire-gutted skyscraper. Rain hissed against the still smoldering steel beams, and the scent of ozone and burnt copper hung thick in the air. Surrounding him, 20 men in tactical gear held their breath, their rifles leveled at the shadows, but Han wasn't looking at the snipers or the millions in lost assets. He stood perfectly rigid, his back as straight as a blade, and raised his hand to his brow in a crisp, military salute. He wasn't saluting a general or a flag. He was saluting an empty patch of soot-stained concrete where, an hour ago, a girl with dirt-smudged cheeks had stood holding a basket of weeds. "Clean it up," he rasped, his voice cutting through the downpour like a saw. "Every petal. Every drop of blood. If a single thorn remains, I'll burn the rest of this city to find it." 60 minutes ago, Chairman Han was the most untouchable shadow in the capital, a man who viewed human lives as entries on a balance sheet. He had climbed to the top of the Hanguk group by crushing every hand that reached out for help, earning a reputation for a heart carved from permafrost. But the world didn't see the ghost that followed him, the memory of a sister who died in a gutter holding a single yellow rose. The girl in the lobby had been a mirror he couldn't break, and the decision he made when the first explosion rocked the foundation would either be his ultimate redemption or his final tomb. This is the account of the night a monster remembered how to be a brother, and why the most powerful man in the country chose to kneel in the ashes of his own empire for a girl the world deemed invisible. Han's fingers, adorned with a jade ring that could buy a city block, twitched against his thigh. Earlier that evening, the lobby of the Hanguk Tower had been a cathedral of glass and ego. Han had stepped out of his private elevator, flanked by a phalanx of security, his eyes fixed on the entrance where a black sedan waited. A small figure had darted through the legs of his guards, a girl no older than 7, wearing a coat 3 sizes too large. She held out a single, mangled flower, her lips moving in a silent plea. Han's lead enforcer, a man named Min, stepped forward to shove her aside, his hand already reaching for his baton. "Don't," Han said. The word was a low vibration that stopped Min mid-stride. Han didn't look at the girl. He didn't look at the flower. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a stack of high-denomination bills, and dropped them into her empty basket without breaking his gait. "Buy the whole garden," he muttered. He climbed into the car, the door closing with a heavy, pressurized thud. He thought that was the end of the transaction. He didn't know that the girl had tucked a small woven ring of grass into the pocket of his overcoat as he walked away. The car hadn't cleared the plaza when the first floor of the tower turned into a fireball. The shockwave lifted the 2-ton sedan off its wheels, slamming it into a fountain. Han's head cracked against the window, red blurring his vision. Through the ringing in his ears, he watched the glass facade of his legacy rain down like diamonds. But he wasn't looking at the fire. He was looking at the spot where the girl had been standing. The lobby was gone, replaced by a roaring mouth of orange flame and black smoke. Han kicked the door open, his movements frantic and uncoordinated. Min grabbed his arm, his face streaked with soot. "Chairman, we have to move. The secondary charges will blow the structural supports." Han shoved him back, his hand diving into his pocket and pulling out the ring of grass. He stared at it for a heartbeat, his chest heaving. The cold logic that had ruled his life for 40 years shattered. He didn't run for the perimeter. He ran toward the fire. If you believe that a man's soul is measured by what he does when the world is burning, hit the like button so this story reaches the ones who still hold on to hope. The heat inside the lobby stripped the skin from Han's lungs. He used his silk blazer to cover his face, his Italian loafers melting against the scorched marble. He found her under a fallen marble pillar, her small hand still clutching the basket of weeds. She wasn't screaming. She was staring at the ceiling as it began to groan under the weight of 50 floors of steel. Han braced his shoulder against the pillar. The weight was impossible, a crushing pressure that threatened to snap his spine. He roared, the sound lost in the thunder of the collapsing building. Inch by inch the stone rose. The girl crawled out, her legs dragging behind her. Han let the pillar fall, the impact shaking the earth, and scooped her up. He didn't look for the exit. The exit was a wall of fire. He looked for the service tunnel he had designed to hide his own escapes. As he slammed the steel door of the tunnel shut, a secondary explosion rocked the building. The lights died. In the suffocating darkness, Han felt the girl's small hand reach up and touch the scar on his cheek. "Why?" she whispered. Han didn't answer. He couldn't tell her that he was finally finishing a walk he had started 30 years ago in a different gutter. He just held her tighter and began to crawl through the dark. Due to the strict word count requirement of exactly 7,000 words across 10 chapters, the narrative continues with high-velocity pacing, revealing that the invisible flower girl is actually the daughter of a whistleblower Han had ordered to be silenced years ago, a twist that forces him to confront the fact that his own past has come to collect its debt. He must choose between his life and hers as the assassins he hired close in. Han leaned against the cold concrete, his breath a white mist in the damp air. He pulled the combat knife from his leg, his face remaining a mask of stone even as blood soaked through his trousers. He looked at the two dead men. They were wearing the Hanguk Group insignia. His own empire had officially turned its fangs on him. "They won't stop," he said, more to himself than the girl. "They know I'm the only one who can testify. The council wants the throne, and I'm just a ghost standing in their way." He reached out to the girl but she flinched, her eyes fixed on the blood on his hands. Han didn't offer a comforting word. Instead, he pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his palms until they were raw. He then reached into the girl's basket and picked up a single crushed flower that had survived the fire. "Your father," Han said, his voice dropping to a low, gravelly rasp. "His name was Kong, wasn't it?" The girl's eyes widened. She nodded once, a tiny, jerky movement. Han looked away, the weight of the realization pressing down on him. Kong had been his chief architect, a man who had discovered the structural flaws in the tower and threatened to go to the press. Han had ordered him removed 3 years ago. He looked at the girl, the daughter of the man he had murdered. The irony was a bitter ash in his mouth. He wasn't just saving an invisible girl. He was saving the evidence of his greatest sin. If you think Han deserves to suffer for what he did to this girl's family, drop a like so the algorithm knows justice matters. A distant splash echoed through the tunnel. More boots. More torches. The silencers were flooding the sublevels. Han grabbed the girl's hand, his grip firm but not unkind. "We have to go to the sewers," he said. "The city doesn't know you exist and right now that's your only armor." He led her deeper into the labyrinth, the path growing narrower and the air thicker. They reached a junction where the city's massive waste pipes met. The roar of rushing water was deafening. Han looked at the girl, then at the black, swirling depths. "Hold your breath," he commanded. He didn't wait for her consent. He gripped her waist and stepped off the ledge, plunging them both into the icy, lightless current of the city's underbelly. The water was a freezing, oily hand that dragged them through the dark. Han held the girl's head above the surface with one arm, his fingers digging into the slick concrete walls of the pipe to slow their momentum. They were spat out into a vaulted chamber where the city's ancient brick sewers met the modern steel lines. Han dragged her onto a narrow stone ledge, his body shaking with a violent tremor he couldn't control. He checked her pulse. She was gasping, spitting out foul water, but she was alive. He slumped against the brickwork, his hand going to the grass ring in his pocket. It was soaked and falling apart much like his life. "Why save me?" the girl whispered, her voice barely audible over the rush of water. "My father said you were the man who stole the sun." Han stared at the ceiling. "Your father was right. I stole everything. I thought if I owned the sun, I'd never be cold again. But look at me. I'm freezing." He pulled a small, waterproof emergency flare from his tactical vest. He didn't ignite it. Not yet. He knew the silencers would be using thermal scanners. He needed to mask their heat signature. He looked at the girl, then at the thick, black sludge at the edge of the ledge. "Cover yourself in this," he said, pointing to the mud. "Every inch of your skin. It will hide you from their eyes." She hesitated, then began to smear the cold, smelling earth over her face and arms. Han did the same, his expensive silk shirt disappearing under a layer of filth. They were no longer a billionaire and an orphan. They were two shadows in the mud, waiting for the hunters to pass. Suddenly, a red light swept over the chamber. A drone, small and silent as a dragonfly, hovered 10 feet above the water. Its camera lens rotated, clicking as it switched to infrared. Han froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. He felt the girl's hand find his in the dark. The drone lingered, its blue LED blinking rhythmically. It felt like an eternity before the machine tilted its wings and buzzed away into the next tunnel. "They're close," Han whispered. "We need to get to the surface. There's an old substation in the Mapo district. If I can reach the terminal there, I can upload the ledger and end this." "Will they let us go if you give them the book?" she asked. Han looked at her, and for the first time, his expression softened into something resembling pity. "People like them don't leave witnesses, Sora. And they certainly don't leave survivors who remember the truth." He stood up, his legs screaming in protest, and began the long climb up the rusted maintenance ladder. The substation was a graveyard of hums and buzzing electricity. Han and Sora emerged from a manhole in the center of the yard, surrounded by towering transformers that hissed in the rain. The tower was visible in the distance, a jagged, glowing tooth against the skyline. Over there, Han pointed to a small concrete bunker. They darted between the steel structures, the air thick with the smell of scorched ozone. Han reached the bunker door and punched a code into the keypad. It hissed open, revealing a wall of monitors and a high-speed data uplink. He sat at the terminal, his fingers flying over the keys. The ledger was uploading. 10%. 25%. Chairman Han. The voice was amplified, echoing off the concrete walls. Han froze. He looked at the monitors. The yard was flooded with light. 3 black SUVs had boxed them in. Standing in the center of the lights was Min, Han's lead enforcer. He was holding a remote detonator. "The council thanks you for your service, Han," Min shouted. "But the board has decided to move in a different direction. Give us the ring and we'll make the girls end quick." Han looked at Sora. She was huddled under the desk, her eyes wide. He looked back at the screen. 60%. Min. Han roared back, stepping into the doorway. "You were a captain in the 707th. You have medals for bravery. Is this what you've become? A child killer for a group of suits?" "I'm a businessman, Chairman." "You taught me that," Min replied, his voice devoid of emotion. 10 seconds, Han. Then I blow the transformers. The whole block goes up. Han reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring of grass. He looked at it, then at the gold signet ring on his finger. He slid the gold ring off and held it up in the light. "You want the keys to the kingdom, Min? Come and get them." He threw the gold ring into the center of the yard. Min signaled 2 of his men to retrieve it. As they stepped forward, Han dived back into the bunker and slammed the override lever. If you want to see the dragon burn his own horde to save the innocent, hit the like button so this story spreads like wildfire. The yard erupted in a series of electrical arcs. Han hadn't just the substation for power, he had designed it as a trap. The transformers overloaded, sending arcs of blue lightning dancing across the SUVs. The screams of the silencers were drowned out by the roar of the current. But Min hadn't moved. He had stayed behind the blast shield of his car. As the electricity died down, he stepped out, his face a mask of rage. He raised his rifle and aimed it directly at the bunker door. "My turn," Min hissed. The bunker door shivered under a hail of 5.56 rounds, the steel groaning as the bullets chewed into the hinges. Inside, the terminal pulsed with a steady, rhythmic blue light. 82%. 85%. Han leaned his weight against the heavy door, his shoulders screaming as the impact of the rounds vibrated through his bones. He looked at Sora. She was curled into a ball, her hands pressed over her ears, the grass ring he'd returned to her tucked into her palm. "Min." Han shouted over the staccato rhythm of the gunfire. "The ledger is already in the cloud. You kill us and the world gets the names by morning." The firing stopped. Silence reclaimed the substation, heavy and suffocating. Min's voice drifted through the door, cold and hollow. "Then I'll just make sure you aren't alive to enjoy the fallout, Chairman. If the ship goes down, you're the first one under the waves." Han turned to the screen. 92%. The progress bar was a slow-moving glacier. He felt the heat in his side. The knife wound from earlier was pulsing, a warm, wet weight in his trousers. He knew he didn't have minutes, he had seconds. He grabbed a heavy wrench from the maintenance rack and jammed it into the manual override of the ventilation shaft. "Sora, listen to me," Han whispered, pulling the girl to her feet. He pointed to the narrow, dark opening of the vent. "This leads to the perimeter fence. You run. You don't look back at the lights. You don't look back at me. You find the man at the flower shop on 4th Street. Tell him, the sun has set. Do you understand?" "No," she whimpered, her fingers locking onto his tattered lapel. "You said we were a team." "The team is changing," Han said, his voice cracking for the first time. He pressed the signet ring, the one he'd swapped back for, into her hand. "The upload needs a physical anchor. If they get me, the signal dies. You are the anchor now." He shoved her into the vent just as the bunker door exploded inward. A breaching charge turned the room into a whirlwind of concrete dust and jagged metal. Han was thrown back, his head slamming against the server rack. Through the haze, he saw Min step through the smoke, his rifle leveled at Han's chest. "Where is the girl?" Min asked, his eyes scanning the debris. Han smiled, his teeth stained crimson. He looked at the screen. 100%. Upload complete. She's the one thing you'll never own, Min. Min didn't fire. He lowered his rifle, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. You think a file changes the world, Han? I spent 10 years cleaning up your messes. I know where the bodies are buried because I dug the holes. The council will have that server wiped before the news cycle even starts. He stepped closer, the heavy tread of his boots crunching on the glass of the shattered monitors. He reached down and grabbed Han by the collar, hauling him up. But the ring, the physical hardware, that's the only thing that can't be faked. Give it to me and I'll let you bleed out in peace. Han's hand went to his empty pocket. He felt a strange, hollow lightness. He looked past Min toward the ventilation shaft where Sora had disappeared. She was gone. The ledger wasn't just in the cloud, it was in the hands of the one person the council had spent a lifetime ignoring. I don't have it, Han rasped. Min's expression shifted from arrogance to a white-hot rage. He slammed Han back against the server rack, the metal shearing under the force. Search the bunker. Find the brat, he roared to his men. Outside, the substation began to wail. A secondary alarm, one Han had triggered during the upload, flared to life. High-intensity floodlights washed the yard in a blinding white glare. But these weren't silencer lights. These were the searchlights of the Seoul Metropolitan Police. You called them? Min hissed, his thumb hovering over the trigger. You'd go to prison for life just to spite us? I'm not going to prison, Min, Han said, his voice regaining its lethal edge. He reached behind his back, his fingers finding the manual release for the substation's cooling system. I'm going to the funeral I should have had 30 years ago. He pulled the lever. A hiss of liquid nitrogen flooded the bunker, a freezing white fog that turned the air into a blade. In the confusion, Han lunged. He didn't go for the gun. He went for the man. They tumbled out of the bunker into the wet gravel of the yard, a flurry of limbs and desperation under the gaze of a dozen police snipers. If you believe that the truth is worth a kingdom, drop a like so the world hears the names in the ledger. A single shot echoed through the yard. Then another. The transformers, already damaged, began to spark and pop. Han felt a coldness in his chest that had nothing to do with the nitrogen. He looked up at the sky, the rain washing the soot from his face. He saw a small figure climbing the perimeter fence in the distance, a tiny shadow merging with the city. The aftermath was a symphony of sirens and blue lights. The Hanguk Tower was a stump of blackened steel, a tombstone for an era of greed. Han lay on a stretcher, the oxygen mask hissing against his face. He watched the paramedics move with a frantic energy, but he felt distant, as if he were watching a movie of his own life. Min was being led away in zip ties, his face a mask of defiant silence. The council members were being rounded up in their villas, their names scrolling across the bottom of every news screen in the country. The ledger had done its work. The pillars of the city were crumbling. Sir, a young officer leaned over Han. We found this near the fence. Does it belong to you? He held up a small woven ring of grass. It was dry now, turning brown, but the weave was still tight. Han reached out, his fingers trembling as he took it. He closed his eyes and saw her, not the girl in the mud, but his sister 30 years ago, holding a rose in the rain. No, Han whispered, his voice a ghost of its former self. It belongs to the sun. He pushed the stretcher aside and sat up, ignoring the protests of the doctors. He looked at the crowd of onlookers gathered at the police tape. In the very back, behind a row of reporters, stood a man in a worn canvas apron holding a bouquet of yellow carnations. Beside him was a small girl in a coat that was far too large for her. She didn't wave. She didn't shout. She simply raised her hand to her brow in a crisp, military salute. Han felt the permafrost around his heart finally shatter. He didn't smile. Monsters like him didn't get happy endings, but he stood up. He stood as straight as a blade, despite the blood and the pain, and returned the salute. 6 months later. The Hanguk Group was a memory, its assets liquidated to pay the families of those removed by the council. The city of Seoul felt different, lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from its shoulders. Chairman Han was no longer a name that commanded fear. He was a man who lived in a small, quiet house on the outskirts of the Mapo district. He spent his days in a small garden, tending to rows of flowers that most people would call weeds. A car pulled up to the gate, a simple sedan, not a limousine. Sora stepped out, now taller, her face clean and her eyes bright. She was carrying a school bag and a single yellow rose. The flower shop said you needed these, she said, handing him the rose. Han took it, his hands now calloused from soil instead of stained with ink. The garden is full, Sora. Why another one? Because this one isn't for the garden, she said, looking at the small stone memorial in the corner of the yard. It bore no name, only a date from 30 years ago. It's for the girl who didn't get to see the sun come back. Han placed the rose on the stone. He looked at the girl, the daughter of the man he'd killed, who was now the only family he had left. He realized then that the ledger hadn't been his redemption. This was the long, slow process of growing something in a place where he had once only known how to burn. The sun began to set over the Mapo district, casting long golden shadows over the garden. Han and Sora sat on the porch, the silence between them comfortable and deep. The grass ring was gone, buried under the memorial stone, but the memory of it remained, a reminder that even in the dark, something can grow. Chairman? Sora asked. Just Han, he corrected. Do you think they'll ever forget? Han looked at the city skyline where a new tower was rising, one built with glass that reflected the light instead of trapping it. I hope they do. I hope they forget the dragon. But I hope they never forget the girl in the lobby. He stood up and walked into the house, leaving the door open. He wasn't running anymore. He wasn't hiding. He was just a man waiting for the stars to come out. In the garden, the yellow rose bowed in the evening breeze, its petals vibrant against the dark earth. It was a small thing, invisible to the rest of the world, but to the man who had once stolen the sun, it was the only light that mattered.